Shane Kelly.
And I'm Kyle Thompson.
And you're listening to General Intellect Unit. And this time we are talking about a game that was released last month, August of this year, called Eliza. And it's real good. This is actually pretty incredible. I had never played one of these kind of clicky-talky sort of visual novel. Is that what the genre is called?
Is that what the kids are calling these days?
Yeah.
The old clicky-talky. Yeah, totally. It's a visual novel. A little bit different from many of the visual novels out there because it's quite restrained in the way that it introduces choice and branching pathways into the game. But when it does introduce choice into the game, it's very considered in how it does it. Mm-hmm.
As far as I can tell, there really isn't much in the way of meaningful choice. At least I didn't detect any kind of branching paths that would, except for choosing the ending, I guess.
Yeah, basically the ending, and then the way that it sort of does the typical visual novel thing of creating an illusion of choice by giving you different responses. Mm-hmm. It does interesting things with that. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
those were hilarious because the main characters, their dialogue is great, but the dialogue choices, right, the responses are all kind of variations on the same kind of non-committal noise, or yeah, I guess so, sure, that kind of thing. Yeah, and even when you get them to refuse or something, it's a very kind of non-refusal. It's oh, I don't know about that, and then the other character talks them into it anyway. So I thought that was very funny.
Yeah,
very much putting a lot of work into that the smoke and mirrors, right, to make choice seem like it's a huge part of it.
It's almost like it's commenting on itself.
Oh, maybe, yeah. So what's this one all about? What's the gist here?
So this is a game set in the near future. In Seattle. It principally takes place in the Queen Anne area of Seattle, so near where the Sky Needle is, that sort of downtown area of Seattle. And it is a visual novel that follows the story of... what was her last name? Evelyn Ishino-Aubrey, is that right?
I'm not sure her last name ever came up in the text for me, or at least I never noticed it.
Oh, really?
I just don't recall.
It definitely does come up. Yes. So the name of the main character is Evelyn Ishino-Aubrey. So she is the child of a international and intercultural relationship. I think her father was Japanese and left when she was young. And Evelyn is a sort of superstar software developer. She has an unusual talent, an unusual creativity and capacity to develop great software. And she was involved in a project called Eliza, which is based off of the original, basically chat-bot that was developed way back in the day.
1966. At MIT.
Yeah, 1966. Essentially, the original Eliza was a kind of comedic parody of psychoanalysis, of the talking method, by just kind of it was a bot that would basically answer everything with a question in order to simulate a psychoanalyst getting you to open up about your experience and yourself. Now, the Eliza in this game which is canonically also sort of connected to that historical Eliza. It was developed as a kind of therapeutic technology, a counseling app of sorts. And Evelyn worked together with a team of people at a company called Skanda. And there was, in particular, project lead. Was his name? Yes. There was a project lead, Damien, who was kind of like the core of the Eliza project, along with Evelyn. And spoiler warnings here, of course. This is a visual novel. If you do not there's very little to talk about other than the story of the game. So, unfortunately, we will be spoiling this game.
I will say that, I think it's a good story. It is 6 hours of clicky-talky, and if you don't think that you're going to actually sit through 6 hours of that, maybe just listen to this episode. If you do think you would like to actually experience it firsthand, probably pause this and go and play it, because it is really good.
It's very well written. It's very well written. It's very well voice acted. So Damien was the project lead, extremely hardworking, and basically overworked himself to death. And this was a traumatic event that more or less caused the members of the original Eliza development group to scatter, and especially Evelyn to go into burnout and just extreme depression, right? A huge depressive episode that lasts a number of years, right?
I think it's 3 years. Yeah.
3 years, yeah. And the game picks up as Evelyn finally begins to emerge from that depressive episode and try to figure out what she's going to do with her life after Eliza has kind of, without her input, become a major tech phenomenon. It's sort of proliferating across Seattle and presumably soon across the world. And how she's going to relate to the remaining members of that original project. And each of these characters is kind of a type. It's a complex type. There are things introduced by the writer. So the writer Matt Burns sort of problematizes these characters by introducing some interesting character traits to them that make them different than just being purely a type. But each of them do represent a certain aspect of the tech industry or of life in a world dominated by the tech industry.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
So, yeah.
On the note of it being a world dominated by the tech industry, this this thing looks very nice. It's a lovely painterly sort of style. The aesthetic is very it's reminiscent of the Deus Ex prequels. It's this kind of warm, cold sort of aesthetic. And again, Seattle, right? So it's just got a lot of that and that kind of tech sheen going on. It's a sort of the beginnings of a sort of near future techno nightmare of Landian proportions, as we will discover in the plot, right?
Yeah, it's I think it's fair to say that Seattle is already kind of a dystopia, and
absolutely
this game doesn't pull any punches in bringing up those dystopian aspects of the city as it exists today. But there is a little bit of, as you said, a kind of near-future tech sheen that's layered on top of that commentary on Seattle, the existing city. Yeah.
That's great. So much of the game is the interactions with the characters and backfilling all that kind of that detail. So we join Evelyn on the train to work, right? And we're kind of sort of introduced to the user interface. There's a sort of ever-present like phone icon, a smartphone icon in the lower right, and the dialogue scrolls across the bottom. You click to advance, that sort of thing. I was initially a little bit confused because the word continue and the phone are right beside each other. So I initially thought, oh, this is going to be like a sort of millennial shut-in nightmare where you can only advance by like glancing at your phone to like check your Twitter feed. Thankfully, that's not actually the case. They're two separate UI elements.
Yes.
But she arrives at this office, right, of the Skanda offices, and meets Ray, who's her sort of manager or handler, and she's here for this job of being what's the term for it? A proxy in the counseling sessions. And the idea here is that the Eliza software is more effective if it's delivered. If the lines are not spoken by like robot voice, but are spoken by a human who's like the proxy relay between the patient and the AI. So it's basically she's going to be paid to sit there in this kind of gig economy very kind of role, right? Like instead of going and picking up a Five Guys meal and hauling it across the city on a bike, her gig economy thing is to sit there and have an AI feed the lines to her. And then she just listens or just sits there and puts a human face on the whole process. So quite disconcerting initially.
Yeah, and the game really uses this premise to good effect, right? Like, because the work that the proxy does is very similar to what you are doing as a player of a visual novel, right? Because visual novels have extremely constrained choice variety, right? It's like almost zero, and you as the player click through each of the text sections. So your participation in the process is required, unlike in a like a TV show or something. But you aren't. You have basically the scope of your agency is just proceed or don't proceed, right? Like that's basically what you have as a player of this game for the most part. And so this is very similar to the way that Eliza, the program, just feeds prompts to the proxy, and then the proxy recites the prompt. And then the conversation continues, right? It's very like you are driven by the machine more so than you are driving the machine.
Oh, totally, yeah. And it's Ray makes this very clear, right? It's like stick to the script, like very strict labor discipline going on here. But even the way this is presented in the user interface when we get into the sessions is that like it's a VR headset sort of display, and the
so good.
It's wonderful. It's so well designed.
Yeah.
But the output from Eliza is kind of in the lower right-hand third of your vision, and then immediately below it is the same sentence, but as a clickable button, as like the game interface. So it is just a one-to-one mirroring of the one and only option that you have in the conversation.
Yeah, I've heard it compared to the test in Blade Runner. Blade Runner 2049, is it? Yeah, 2049. Yeah, the baseline test. Yes, the baseline test. I've heard it compared to the baseline test before, and
it's that call and response, right? Sort of structure, right?
Yeah,
like it's back and forth, right? Like cells, they were all put together at a time, cells and back and forth. Yeah.
Yeah. This interface is so fascinating because essentially you're looking through like an AR visor, mm-hmm. right? Like that's how this is presented.
It's a Google Glass sort of thing, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And you can see the like sort of like text log of Eliza's operation on the left side of the screen, and this it's really interesting because it spells out like the protocol that Eliza is engaging at this particular stage in the conversation.
Right.
So it'll be like, what is it? Like intervention is one of them, or like challenge. It has certain prompts it uses.
Yeah, so like in the first session, we get this just depression guy, right? Like he's very down. He's and as Eliza's prompting for these, like, why do you feel so down? He's like, well, there's no future, greed, cruelty, alienation. It's all stuff that resonates very strongly. But you get that debug readout of like phase equals discovery, phase equals intervention, phase equals recommendations, and like picking out the keywords, right? The little sort of like doom, and then in brackets negative, and then -2, and this sort of thing. You can see it's
so interesting
down, right?
Well, it is, and it is in a way, but it also that text log also makes it transparent how like this is kind of like a Bayesian process that it's going through, right? Like it's kind of just like averaging out answers and stuff, like because it will code something as negative because in the most conventional sense that word is negative, but then maybe when you as a human being interpret the conversation, you can see that like the actual sense of the word in the context of the conversation is not the same as what Eliza registered.
Absolutely, yeah. It's like in this first session, it's initially comes across as quite impressive. It's like, oh wow, look at all this debug output. But yeah, as you said, there'll be a line like, oh god, I had an awfully good burger or whatever, and it's like it'll pick up on the word awful and like assign -7 points to it or something, and it's just like this is actually not that good. And that ties in with the original 1966 Eliza, in that like that program was initially a joke, right? It's just a bag of regexes that like then it's very basic semantic manipulation and like string manipulation stuff, but it's weirdly effective. Like what they found was that when people actually sat down in front of it, they did feel better, because it's strangely effective to hold a mirror up to someone and be like, why do you feel sad? And I was like, oh, why do you think that is? And, this kind of thing. Strangely effective. And like, but the same thing's going on here. There's an interesting mirroring though, in that the original Eliza, the creator, didn't intend it to be a real thing. It was a kind of a joke, and he was surprised to learn that people were actually liking it. And he's like, whoa, that's weird. Like it's supposed to be a transparently feeble attempt to just like mirror the responses, right? Whereas this character, Evelyn, she intended it to help people, but then when she sits in front of it herself, it's like, oh, this is kind of a sham,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, like we get into her motivations a little bit later in this, but they're very complex, right? Like there's a lot of layers of nuance about like how she conceived of this program originally. Like, yes, it was a therapeutic thing, but there's like a lot of caveats to that, and they have to do with like her personal psychological struggles and where she was in her life and all this kind of stuff, right? But the way that the company markets it is, no, this is therapy, right? Skanda markets it that way. And yeah, I was just gonna say if anybody wants to try something like Eliza, and like there's that Emacs feature you can use
the pinhead mode or whatever it's called.
Pinhead psychoanalyst. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's very similar to Eliza.
It's very cool.
Yeah.
But in this early session, we also get the kind of a glimpse of one of the sort of recurring themes here, is that the client's just kind of he's sort of his speech sort of accelerates, and he's just kind of like having a sort of mini breakdown, and he sort of this sense like, I just want her to say something. You, the person in front of me right now, just say something that isn't from the machine. And of course, she has to stick to the script, because the UI of the game is just presenting those options to you. There's nothing you can do. So there's this wonderful sort of unease and disconnect there. And then at the end, after that, it's just like, oh, I've got some recommendations for you. And it's like, I don't know, some fucking VR dolphin bullshit, and like diazepam is basically the prescription for everyone, which is awesome.
Yeah, it's amazing like how rote the answers are. It's just like, here are the drugs, here is the app, please come back.
Oh yeah, it's just the app, right? It's the same app on the phone that you use to like get the gigs, right?
Happy Dolphin, play Happy Dolphin, or whatever it is. Yeah, there's all kinds of like ridiculous sounding apps that the Eliza program prescribes.
It's like dolphins and then meadows and some other fucking nonsense. But she does bring this up with Ray. It's like, hey, and then Ray is like, oh, because this is clearly sort of insufficient. And it's like Ray is like, oh yeah, I think like external care referrals were a feature on the roadmap. That kind of classic startup word. But I don't know what happened to that. It's just like, it fell off the fucking agile grid or whatever. Yeah.
I wonder why this company would not be interested in referring people to a therapist. Who could say?
Yeah, so there's that, right? There's keeping them on the hook for, well, if they're still ill, they'll still have to come to us. But I think there's also that you get the sense that this is definitely just like a heat sink for all of society's problems, right? Because this is a fucked up society that they live in this fiction. It's a fucked up society we live in out of the fiction as well. But there's a lot of this kind of thing of like, oh well, the world has a mental health crisis, and clearly a startup with a cool app is the way to go, right? Like, and it's just kind of a dump for all of the bad shit. Like this guy clearly needs real help, but this is acting as a heat sink to prevent the help from ever happening, right?
Yes,
which is dreadful.
Yep. And you can see like in the Eliza text log how like when confronted with like agitated behavior, because this thing also like measures the like vital signs of the person that's being therapized, right? They like when confronted with like agitated behavior, it has like specific fallbacks that it does in order to contain that outrage, right?
It's a homeostatic limiter, right?
Yeah, that's right.
We get a second session with another recurring character, Maya. And it's now you start to see the pattern here. It's the same chit-chat shit from Eliza about the weather, the same like set phase equals discovery stuff, and you're just kind of repeating stuff back at her. And her trick is that like she's all nerves and anxiety about her career. She's an artist, but it's not really happening. She's going to all these engagements, but nobody's really picking up her work. The usual sort of failing artist stuff. Big hints of imposter syndrome there, and this is really hit home as well.
Yeah, this was a big mood. This was all a big mood.
Absolutely.
It was just like, oh my god. Oh.
What does it say that I identified with pretty much every single one of these patients except for the English major guy?
No, it's like it's an intense game to play through because these character sketches are very insightful and like raw. And it's like, yeah, you're set it like, it's based on a very well-constructed sort of gloss of where society is at right now and the kinds of people that are struggling with this reality.
It's very sharp. So it really is.
It's very, very sharp, yeah. And it's like sitting through a therapy session with like a character who represents some aspect of your life is just like, it's rough. Especially when the therapy is shit. Especially when it's just a fucking chat bot. Yeah.
But the last major event then of Chapter 1 is meeting up with this old friend Nora at a cafe. And this is where we start to piece together some of the backstory, right? That like Nora's asking like, oh, well, do the people at the new office know? That's left hanging. It's like, no, not yet. It's like, what should they know? Like, give me the tasty treat, right? Like I want to know what's going on here. And you definitely get a lot of these allusions to like her sort of traumatic depression, just span of time, right? The 3 years she's kind of been sort of off the grid, and it's nice to see her. It's nice to see you back on the scene, Evelyn. This sort of thing. We get sort of mentions of some of the other characters that are coming up here, like this guy Soren, right? Like he's kind of you get the impression it was an old boss or an old colleague. He's a bit of a creep in this sort of thing. Nora's a great character. She's awesome.
Really fun character. Basically on the level, like quit her job at Skanda, is working as a freelance coder / electronic music artist, and DJ, and seems to be the character is like most capable of actually caring about Evelyn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know? she's the only one who has seems to have begun the story with a deep emotional investment in Evelyn, right? Like she's the only prior friend that's around.
Yeah, so she has that kind of empathetic dimension, and then also that bohemian dimension, right? Like what she represents is bohemia, right? It's escape from the square world, and go out and do cool art shit. That's her decision in reaction to the terrible work environment that she had in the tech industry. Yeah.
Which I guess that gives you the trifecta, right, of reactions to shitty work in the tech industry, right? Like on the one hand you have Damien, who's worked to death. Then you have Nora, who kind of bombs out in kind of exuberant fashion, right? Like she just leaves because it's something that she's decided she's sick of, and Evelyn, who bombs out for a different reason. It's just total burnout and a sort of traumatic reaction to Damien's death.
Yeah, and I think probably an important thing to mention in relation to that is that, we've talked a lot about sort of like labor organizing in the tech industry and all kinds of association, solidarity, that kind of stuff. None of that is presented as a possibility in this game. Right, it's extremely individualistic in the way that it treats people's relationships to each other, and that is definitely effective at conveying something about the atomized neoliberal hellscape we live in. But one of the sort of baseline premises for this game is that organizing to change the tech industry is impossible. That's just barred as a possibility in the fiction here. And so, I mean, that's a major, it certainly complicates my feelings about the game. But we might talk about that a little bit more in the conclusion, but just putting out there that, there's those three reactions to the tech industry that you could have. Or you could organize, but that one isn't presented in this game.
No, right? that's just absent completely, yeah. Nora does give us the sort of push towards this, the opening of Chapter 2, which is to go and see Soren's appearance at a conference, One Mind 2.0 or some bullshit like that.
Yeah, One Mind 2.0 escalating the wellness revolution.
No, stop. Oh, no. But the core of his talk is about, Eliza, it's okay, whatever, but it has weaknesses, right? It's got data, but it's not knowledge. The model, all these kind of, problems, right? And, that it isn't really treatment, right? That Eliza can't turn its observations into comprehensive treatment, right? As we've seen two times in a row, where it's like, oh, here's VR dolphins and diazepam, and that'll get you going. So his new thing is this basically direct brain stimulation, or mind control. It's like, oh, we're going to do psychotherapy via induced dreams, right? And it's going to eliminate all human suffering forever, and this kind of shit.
It's control in the cybernetic sense of control, not control in the top-down brainwashing type of control. Yeah, so it's basically a reflexive system where you can create it creates a virtual reality that you experience in your mind, and so you're basically able to artificially lucid dream your way into the end of suffering, right? Yeah.
And the thing that it jumps to mind immediately is that somebody would immediately ask themselves, can it run Doom? and get Doom to run on it, and then it's like, oh, clearly it's a video game hyper violence fucking dream simulator.
Yeah,
that's how it would actually be deployed, right?
Yeah,
you'd have
so
Call of Duty 67 or whatever, fucking with its Epic Store DRM or whatever all this shit is, or fucking Steam installed in your dreams or something would be the way forward, right?
Yeah, certainly. Like, that doesn't come up in the game, but you can absolutely imagine the games industry being like, ooh, cool, direct brain stimulation. Let's like, you know, like Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft, each of them come up with an incompatible software platform for your direct brain stimulation.
Oh no. So Evelyn kind of leaves. Like this is looking very dystopian. Runs into this guy Rainer in the lobby. He's the current CEO of Skanda. I'm not sure when this is pieced together, but like Soren was the former sort of lead of the Eliza / Skanda kind of thing. Rainer's the new guy. Soren seems to have been pushed out to some extent.
Well, Rainer was always the money guy in the background.
Okay.
But he had very little to do with the project until like it was near being able to be like monetized, right? And Soren was the project lead.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes more sense. But these are two people who are set up in opposition to each other. It's not a coincidence that they're introduced so early in chapter 2 in sort of a pair. So there's in between these kind of things. There's often little pings on your phone, and you can check them optionally, right? Like anytime you get a plot important text from a friend such as Nora, it'll actually interrupt. Like it'll pop up for you. But some of the optional stuff, like emails you receive, are optional. You can click through them. At this point, I clicked through and found like a horrifying email about like an article that had just been published with like they're planning to introduce Eliza to schools, like high schools.
Yeah.
I have a feeling I missed other horrifying fucking emails, but yeah, you get these tasty little treats occasionally in the game. It's like, oh wow, this is nice background storytelling.
Yeah, it's really interesting because like okay, so I think that one in particular is coming to you through the Skanda employee app.
Oh, right.
It's like a presser that comes out to the employees, and Eliza, instead of being deployed with proxies, is being rolled out to schools as a smartphone app because that means it's easier to get kids to participate in it.
And you cut down on the labor cost as well, right?
And actually, I think that Evelyn at some point in the game mentions that she had thought that, you know, there would be sort of like multiple interfaces for Eliza, and like text would be one of them. So this was kind of what Evelyn had in mind, but like it's also not like I don't think it was this like horrific corporatized like, hey, like, you know, it wasn't enough that we made slot machine apps to give to all your children. Now we're going to make an abusive counselor app that traumatizes them for the rest of their lives.
Oh no, fuck. Yeah.
But like you can absolutely imagine this, right? Because it's like, you know, you think about like when Chromebooks got created and then Google was like pushing them out to schools, right? Like it feels so reminiscent of that, or like back in the day when Apple did that with like pushing apples into schools, or Microsoft making sure that like, you know, everything was Windows and Office throughout the education system. Like the way in which the education system is just like a very convenient platform for these large tech firms to just like basically run unrestricted social experiments on children.
Yep.
Is pretty amazing. Yeah.
It reminds me of this is a tiny tangent, but like it reminds me of like Mark Fisher's thing, I think, in his thesis, where like because they're so imaginative and like they're so able to believe that inanimate things have these kind of animate characteristics, that children are the kind of right and proper subjects of late capitalism. That it's not an accident that so much of capitalist technology is oriented towards children, because that's how they form subjects that are kind of pliant within the system.
Children really understand brands and brand identity.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, there's absolutely something to that, right? Like there's an obvious there is an obvious infantilization that comes with like late capitalism, right? Or yeah, like, you know, basically from the boomer generation onward, like down to like the kawaii aesthetics that come out of Japan, right? And like the way that everything is turned into a game, and like you know, there's just so many layers on which we are constructed as like childlike or adolescent subjects in this form of capitalism. And basically, if you are no longer able to participate in culture in that childlike way, you are basically social detritus, right? Like you no longer have a lot of productive value anymore, right? So it gets to this like youth worship, and like that's institutionalized in like the job market and stuff too, right? So yeah, it's heavy stuff. And just, yeah, like even the way that like brands create these like wacky identities to talk to consumers, right? Like there's something playful about that as a communication strategy, which again gets back to this kind of like, well, we're just goofing around on the playground kind of stuff.
Yeah, totally. We then get a couple of more sessions. We're back at the office. One with this fella Gabriel, who's about to become a father, and he's very under a lot of stress, right? Like it's a lot of burnout and pressure and stuff like this, and family conflict and so on. This again resonated pretty hard, you know.
Oh like, yeah, no, this was a lot.
Yeah,
oh boy. Yeah, especially where this story goes, it's just like, oh god, my heart.
It's pretty exquisite. There's a lot of this kind of with Gabriel. There's a lot of that kind of like toxically masculine sort of thing of like just shut up and take it sort of thing. I was like, that's what men do. You know, it's my role to be under this kind of pressure. It's my role to be like chewing my fucking cheek off with anxiety. That sort of thing. But this is his first session. He'll come back a couple of times. What's very notable here as well, like he even the way the session ends, he's very much just left on his own, right? Like he came in having like no support from his family, no support from anyone, and he leaves in the same state because this is fucking worthless, right? This same like 5-stage process, this like bag of regex or whatever that is at the core of the fucking Perl script that is Eliza, right? Like it's worthless.
The process I have written down here because it gets sent out to you in like one of those employee presser things. It's the first stage is discovery. The second stage is challenge. The third stage is intervention, and the fourth stage is conclusion. So I mean, really, the sort of core of the efficacy of Eliza is it does that therapist thing of breaking the standard conversation format by challenging the person who is being therapized, right? Like the patient, right? And that kind of like throws them back on their back foot, and then they're like introspecting and analyzing themselves, and then that means that the structure of the bot as this like transparently superficial thing is like basically forgotten or masked by that introspection, that inward focus that the bot imposes on the subject. So yeah, that's something you definitely see him go through. But then yeah, the conclusion is like, well, this is totally useless. Like because he's going through some really real stuff. And it's just like, oh, here's the VR experience, starry skies, and some meds. That's it.
I feel like it's so close to just like, hey, look, if you want to feel better, go home, play Quake, and drink. It's pretty much what they're recommending, you know?
Yeah. Oh, totally. Totally. Get your gamer fuel and your game and just escape from reality. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We get another session with Maya, where it's kind of developing her thread a little. Again, the career anxiety, but particularly around, there's a lot of anxiety around this, like the social interactions. Like she's putting herself out there and nobody's responding. There seems to be a lot of
focus on Twitter, right? And like on social media presence.
Yeah. I think she definitely resents the kind of rat race and the kind of she even uses the term the popularity contest of it all. It's maybe not quite so obvious in this session, but as her thread develops, there's a deep, burning resentment of the fact that it's not actually a kind of meritocracy, right? Like her art doesn't pass on its own merit. There's this monkey game of like going and talking to people and kind of going along with the little, oh yeah, nice to see you, and all this kind of shit in the art world, which she fucking despises. And I'd hate it too, because it's it's not great stuff. But
yeah, I think there's very few people who actually like that. There's just people who benefit from it more and people who benefit from it less. But yeah, it's like, she sort of like recites a lot of these things that you'll see on like kind of like content mill sites online, like the 5 ways to kickstart your creative career and this kind of shit, right? Like oh, you got to be like networking and stuff, like this like the startup of you, this entrepreneurship, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, hustle, kind of like meritocratic nonsense. Which, like, you gotta participate in if you are existing in these spaces, right? Like, I make tabletop role-playing games, and that's just one creative space. It's just the same as all the other ones. And they all have these dynamics, and they're all structured by, obviously, various forms of structural oppression, class inequalities, hugely important, and then also just the ways in which these platforms engineer conversations to be maximally profitable for them, right? And Maya is like resentful of the whole thing, understandandly, because it's not getting her anywhere. It's like that sort of horrible tension of having like this incredible pressure to perform entrepreneurship at the same time that you're just like staring out on this like void of rejection.
Absolutely.
It's a really, really stressful dynamic, right?
Yeah, totally. It's again, all this resonates a bit too much because it reminds me a lot of. I wasn't like in music for very long. I did my sort of undergrad stuff in audio engineering and stuff, but like just being kind of in that and around that, and it was like there's a lot of that. It's just this artist thing, right? Like it's so familiar. The next session introduces us to a character which I love, Holiday, who's this lovely old lady. Why is she even here? Like it's she just
she represents she represents the social damage that the tech industry does.
Oh, totally right. But like in fiction, why does she come here?
Yeah, or why is she here? Well, because she's incredibly lonely. That's why.
Okay.
Yeah,
I just couldn't remember.
She wants somebody to talk to. That's what it's about. Yeah. Like I don't think she straight up says that, but it's very obvious in the way that she speaks that this is somebody who has not been exposed to human conversation to like a reasonable degree in a very long time. And like when you meet people like that, they just want to talk and talk and talk and talk to an uncomfortable degree, right? Because they've been so starved for conversation.
And she does that with aplomb in this conversation. So it opens with the whole thing of like, oh well, I thought I'd give it a shot. And it's like I'm not really crazy. There's a lot of people out there, they really need the help, but no, not me. And this kind of thing. I just smoke a bit. It's kind of getting a bit pricey, but it's so one of my neighbors. They had a little bit of spare. It just keeps going on and on. She's talking about like a guy that was on the bus, and then there's a dog, and then there's just so much other stuff. stuff.
Yeah.
It's great. But like Eliza cannot keep up with this whatsoever. Like if you watch the debug output on the left, it's just not getting anything. And we do get a lot of that kind of stuff of like, you know, the gentrification, right? The Google buses or whatever. And then she's on to past life regression, which Eliza still doesn't understand. And then it's on to something else. Really, she's a great character. She's like this person with so much history, so much. I would absolutely love to just sit down with her and be like, just let it all fucking out, because I want to hear everything she has to say. But Eliza's got to do the same fucking 5-step thing, right? Like, and eventually recommend her what fucking morphine and the Meadow app or something for the end, you know?
Yeah, well, she's like when she gets recommended the app, she's like, my phone's broken.
Yeah, which is classic old lady move. Like that it just this. I already know this person, right? Like she's so real. Yeah, and she won't have she doesn't have a computer either, right? Like that's another line that comes up of like,
yeah, it's like maybe I could go to the library kind of thing. Yeah, and it's like, you know, this is just coming from like intense destitution, right? Like, you know, she puts on a brave face, but her life is falling apart.
Yeah. There's a very interesting bit at the end where, again, Eliza, I'm making shit up with that, morphine or whatever. Eliza recommends very specific psychiatric drugs that, like, it's not like she's giving a prescription, or it's a fucking AI. It's not like the AI is giving a prescription. They're recommending that you go to your doctor and ask for this. Very specific thing. And Holiday's like, oh, but what was that? What was the name of that thing? And then Eliza just moves on to the concluding statement of like, oh, good day, we'll see you again next week. And she's like, she guesses what the name was. It was like, oh, psilocybin, whatever. Oh yeah, I can remember that or whatever. And it's just like, whew, it's just wonderful, right? Like this Eliza shit simply doesn't work, right? Like, but this is, and Holiday is the one who breaks it completely. Like it is just in bits on the floor at the end of this session. Oh, wonderful.
Right. Because like there is a certain way in which her sort of rambling conversation about the things she's seen and what she experienced and like what's going on, it breaks the kind of like narcissistic assumptions that are built into the Eliza app.
Yes, 100%.
Like Eliza just can't cope with it because it's not an extremely like self-centered introspective conversation. Yeah.
I think I've noted somewhere in the notes that like Eliza is kind of, it's playing its best when it's dealing with like millennial depressives like Maya or whoever, where there's a certain low variety sort of like people who've been ground down so far that like all their variety has been attenuated to the point where they are actually quite predictable, and Eliza can deal with that. But yeah, Holiday's off the fucking scales. It's just like there's no way she could ever fit into this paradigm.
Yeah, the other thing to mention about her is that she has lived in Seattle for a long time. Like you get the sense that like, I guess she's like a like boomer kind of generation, like probably like has been here since like the 70s, 60s, something like that. You know, she's seen the city change, and she represents like what Seattle used to be before all of this tech stuff, right? Like,
certainly, yeah. Super recognizable anywhere in the world that has even the slightest sort of gentrification going on. So our next scene then is meeting Soren at a restaurant, and this is kind of just a lot of the pitch here is that like he wants you to get on board for this new venture, but this is where we start hearing about Damien, right? Like, and there's a wonderful little bit here, like of like, oh, you know, it's understandable you had to take some time out, you know, and you know, do his memory right, you know. And it's like, who's? Well, Damien. And it's like the ambient music just cuts, and it's just wonderful. So we're getting these little hints of there's something went on here, right? There's a trauma involving this Damien character that we don't know yet, what's happening is that like Evelyn is being headhunted by Soren and will be headhunted by Raynor, and a lot of these kind of conversations she's very non-committal. Is like, I don't know if I want to do this sort of thing, but she's offered a demo for later in the game, right? Like to come and see, right? Like just see the technology, see the dream stimulation thing, see what's going on. They then transition to going to Nora's show, right? That after this dinner, Nora has a show on at a venue called Jouissance, and Soren is like, he acts kind of weird and coy about it. He's like, oh well, it's a kind of a strange club. I don't know if you'll be into it. And she's like, what do you mean? It's like, oh, it's like a bondage theme sort of thing. And then they show up and it's not. It's just a fucking rat hole, fucking like techno bunker, And she's like, why did you think this was a BDSM club? And he's just like, oh, no, I don't know. And he excuses himself and hits on some fucking randos, right? Like, he's just like bothering some women at the bar, right? Like, what a guy. Like, what a fucking guy.
There's like, he says that, like, maybe they have, like they only do the BDSM stuff sometimes.
Like on the weekends or something, yeah.
Yeah, so like it's maybe he's been here before for that. It's not really clear, but like also like there's just like a very convincing portrayal in Soren of like just a dude who does not respect women's boundaries, right? Like at all. Like he cannot help himself because he's a broken person, right? Like, he is a complete mess, and he tries to escape from his problems through drinking. He's an alcoholic, but also through womanizing and just being, like, way too much. Just way too much. He's just, like, he's always skirting the edge of just being like very like it's always uncomfortable with Soren.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like there's always an undertone of sexual harassment in every conversation you have with him, and
barely under that threshold. Barely.
Yeah. Well, and Evelyn is just constantly like asserting boundaries, and like he's constantly testing them, right? Like that is the kind of dynamic, and it's like
there's
yeah. Go ahead.
There's like this bit here where it's like, oh, because they're listening to Nora on stage, right? She's up on stage, she's doing the ambient music changes in accordance with this. But Soren's like, oh, she has a very interesting stage name, Little Sappho. You know what that? Do you know what that means? And like one of Nora's, or not Nora, but Evelyn's options is like, of course I fucking know what that means. Like, don't be so patronizing. Like shutting.
Well,
it
yeah,
down.
because he phrases it in a like extremely condescending way of like, well, I am the professor, like I know Greek mythology, etc., like I know so much more than you. And it's also like very clearly like him trying to angle in for a threesome. Like it's just like, oh, this guy is so hard to be around Soren.
Yep. He's testing. Very, very testing character. Thankfully, he's not on screen all that much.
Yeah. But, like, very, very believable, though, right? Like, because he represents the way in which, like, people with money and connections just are, like, serial harassers in the tech industry. Right?
He's an older guy as well, right? Like it's he's very much a type, right? Like you can see the straw man taking form in your head, right? Like you just know who this person is. Like there's a sense memory that's been repressed of like encountering this person in the wild before.
Yeah. It's that weird convergence of gross academic dude with gross tech dude that you get with Soren.
Yep. We get a different kind of gross dude though in chapter 3, where we go to meet Raynor at the Skanda offices. This guy is an absolute fucking reptile. he's so bad, but like in such a different way. Like, God, I fucking hate him.
He definitely reads less wrong. There's no fucking question in my mind.
Yeah. This is like, yeah, right in the pocket for that kind of like Landian kind of Roko's basilisk sort of less wrong kind of tech, just fucking tech guy. Like, goddamn. Like, again, a sense memory of encountering these people like in the wild, right?
Yeah, like he's so he's like the CEO of Skanda, ludicrously wealthy. I think he comes from old money. It's said at some point. So like he's like one of these like VC guys who came into tech, like did not come up through tech, but came into tech.
He's got like Peter Thiel vibes.
Yeah, and you know, just ice cold, like sociopath, and like basically has that kind of charisma of like, I am so certain about what I believe, and I have this vision, and it's bigger than any of us, and you just need to get on board. And yeah, like aesthetic wise, like he's got all the ink paintings on the wall scrolls, right? And then, you know, fine Chinese and Japanese pottery, is obsessed with poetry, you know, considers himself to be like, you know, an aristocrat of the mind, as well as just above all the hoi polloi, right? Like he is he's a lot.
Yeah. But he's trying to get Evelyn back on board as well, right? Like to come back to the project and to take it over for the kind of the next great leap forward, which I don't think we're introduced to here yet. But he's kind of really trying to rope her in with this curiosity of brilliant engineers and, you know, I don't know, all those kinds of appeals. So she's being pulled in two different directions by these,
like
just grotesques.
Basically, like, don't you want to like change history? Don't you want to be a part of something huge? You know,
what's that Steve Jobs bit where he's like, put a dent in the universe or some shit like that?
Yeah, that he's definitely got a lot of Jobs energy as well.
Big Jobs energy.
Yeah, like he also he talks about Soren and sort of gives his read on Soren, like that, like he's got that kind of like, I have everyone's personality nailed, right? Like I can read people and I can use people, and I know how to do that perfectly. Yep. Everyone's just a pawn on his chessboard.
As will become more apparent, right? We're brought down to the basement, I guess the server farms or the kind of research facility, for a little look around, and we meet this guy Erland, who's the current chief engineer. He's a kid. He's like fucking 19 or something, and he's kind of starstruck, right? Like, oh shit, this is the Evelyn, right? Like the original system's here, right? At the core, we've got a lot of you know, plumbing layered around it, but you know, all of your code's still there, that sort of thing. And there's these telling sort of lines here that like none of us really understand what's going on in there, right? Like this is an inherited like legacy system, because the original like power team dissipated after the death of one of the power team.
And I think that Evelyn has a reflection here about how Eliza used to run on her laptop. And she's like, why do they need all these servers? Like, what's going on? Because, like, this is just a chat bot. It doesn't need, like, you know, a NSA grade server farm to run it. Like, what is all this about, right?
And it's all, I mean, we'll find out later. It's all for this kind of like, it's scaled up in all these kinds of rather horrifying ways, right? Big surveillance nightmare, NSA. But I think there's a really fun interaction here where it's something about like the proxies, right? Like she's a super effective proxy. They've been keeping an eye on her stats for the sessions. She's weirdly effective at that. And I think Erland frames this as a sort of problem, right? Because the objective is that they would be able to smooth over the human differences between proxies. And that like, our aim is to provide quality care for everyone, regardless of any differentiating factors. Yeah, he is so that kind of young tech guy, sort of vulgar rationalist kind of thing, right? Where it's like what Tina talked about. And what I think Pickering talks about a little bit, where in the kind of mainstream kind of scientific kind of ideology of our age, difference and variation are seen to be deviations from a ideal norm, right? That the variations between sessions and the variations between people are kinks to be smoothed out. That it is possible to approach perfection. Whereas Evelyn has probably the other sort of vibe on this where, no, the differences are what matter. The variation is the thing that matters, not the ideal central sort of ideal subject or whatever. There's something really wonderful about this exchange, right?
Yeah, and there's a way in which Erlen reads the imperatives of Skanda in the most charitable way possible, which is like assuring, reliably effective care, regardless of the proxy. Whereas, if you really think about it for a second, the reason why they're shooting for that is so that their proxies will be even more interchangeable, right? Yep. And like
it's a labor issue.
It's a labor issue. This is like there's a huge like labor issue at the background of this, which is that this is about de-skilling therapists, right? Like that is one of the major things going on with Skanda and with Eliza.
But we'll catch up with Erland again later. We're then back in the counselling centre talking to Ray, where Evelyn comes clean about her history in this thing, right? And Ray is like actually quite understanding, right? She's like, oh well, it makes sense you'd want to do like on the ground research, right? Seeing through the user's eyes, and she's really kind of gushing about this, right? Like it's she's really pleased to be able to work with this sort of rock star of the early project.
Yeah, she's like definitely a fan of Skanda. Like she has a fan mentality, right? And yeah, just saying, oh, you worked with Rainier, like, but like there's also like a definite like there is a way in which. Like, when she interacts with Evelyn, there's like a really interesting dynamic where Evelyn, because she is a depressive person, because she has imposter syndrome, because she's coming off of, like, really intense depression, she tends to, like... And also just because I get the sense that, like... She doesn't necessarily come from like the most privileged background, but ever since she went to college, like the sorts of struggles that normal working people have kind of been like intangible to her, right? Like because she's this superstar coder, like she just operates at a level of social privilege that somebody like Ray couldn't even begin to aspire to, right? And like Evelyn just kind of treats this as matter of fact because she's self-loathing, right? Like she can't own, like I guess she doesn't have like trying to struggle for like what the kind of virtue is that like where you can accept your position in society but not flaunt it, right? Like, she can't do that because she's so self-loathing. And then on the other side, it's like Ray has this kind of, like, fan reaction to Evelyn, but it's also concealing the extent of her, like, class resentment. Because, again, like, she's just kind of always, like, poking Evelyn, like, you should be more proud of, like, the things that you've done and the people that you know, because, like, somebody like me who's hustling, like, every day as hard as I can is, like, it is absolutely beyond the realm of possibility that someone in the capitalist class like Rainier Sai would ever consider me to be anything other than an ant,
Absolutely, yeah. I really like Ray as a character for that, right? She's a very important corrective for the other characters who are all of this kind of reified or rarefied kind of strata of either VC scumbag kind of layers or tech entrepreneurs or just kind of superstar coders. Like Ray does help to ground that quite a bit and provide some very important sort of counters to some of Evelyn's tendencies. Absolutely. We get 2 sessions then back to back with new characters. We've got this guy Mark who's like super gruff and shitty. He's just like he's been sent into the therapy thing because
Mark.
of like anger management issues. Like HR has sent him in, and he's just not playing ball at all.
Mark.
His whole shtick is that he's an old fucking he's an old timer from the kind of the real trenches, right? You know, back in the day when we really had to fight to make these companies work, right? And he just resents the snowflakes, right? You know, you got to be nice to them these days, and he's no time for that. So yeah, really really wonderful sort of portrayal of that kind of scumbag, right? You know,
we all know a Mark,
the old timers,
right?
Like the bad kind of old timers, like not the nice Unix graybeards who teach you how to use awk or something like that. These are the guys who are just like fly off the handle at any fucking opportunity and get into trouble with HR.
Yeah, because he's like, so like he even talks about like the kinds of products he shipped, and it's like, you know, like, I made the best goddamn filing application ever shipped.
It's all like invoicing apps and shit like that.
Right, like it's this real like 90s model of like business apps that he's developed.
He's an Oracle guy. That's what's going on here. He's a fucking Oracle guy.
Oh yeah. Oh, he's 100% a Java programmer or somebody who uses .NET exclusively, right?
It's line of business stuff. But it's he's so proud of it, right? And it's this he has this kind of mix of this like completely like focused on the tech and the business and the bottom line, you know, that kind of stuff. And this internalized trauma, like he's got this siege mentality going on. Like you can tell he's basically got like fucking like Vietnam shell shock going on from those like heady days of the 90s Oracle, Java, fucking
of just
building invoicing apps, you know.
Absolutely sacrificing his life to this job, right? Yeah, but the thing is, when he is like criticizing Eliza, he's entirely correct, right? Like when he calls when he's like, the results for this software are inconclusive, which like other people will not tell you, right? Like other people are going to lie about its efficacy. Like somebody like Ray would definitely have been lied to about it and would repeat that lie in like 100% belief, right, that it was true. And when he says it's snake oil, he's totally right. You know, like when like it's very funny, right? Because like he has an accurate assessment of the situation, but he's just such a broken person. And like it's also very interesting the way in which he represents this like 90s tech guy, or like, you know, the kind of person like I've met so many people like this. So I think like, you know, a lot of like old like sysadmins and stuff, you know, this real like just aggressive masculinity, and like they absolutely do not fit into what tech has become, thanks to like the integration of like marketing and like a whole bunch of like humanities stuff and like, you know, expensive architecture and lifestyle development and like all of this like really sort of sophisticated marketing driven, but then also like just like what money has done to tech, you know, where it's gone from this kind of like engineering focus sort of like, oh yeah, you know, we're just the sort of like low white collar workers like churning out product, like we've got to make sure it's, you know, battle tested, precise, you know the ropes, I'm like an artisan kind of thing, to, you know, like just these people who've come into the industry later where it's just like drowning in money, and you have like people from much more privileged backgrounds coming in, or just like the services being made necessary or made available to people in tech, or even just being necessary to like sell themselves to be more urbane, to, you know, like it's like fucking artisan donuts and craft beer as opposed to whatever, like, you know, Mountain Dew or whatever Mark used to drink, you know, black coffee, right? Mm-hmm. And like, yeah, black coffee and Dunkin' Donuts, right? Not this like, you know, $6 donut. Just super interesting character as like a social commentary kind of thing. I don't think we ever see him again. Do we ever see him again? No, he's just... No, you get his resignation email, later on, and it's so good because he's like,
Dear
yeah, basically he's like Rainier thinks that the backdoor to like the email server that I had from back in the day was closed, but I still got it. Nice. And he just like, you know, posts this like extremely like toxic rant about the business and how he's leaving the company. So yeah, like he's sort of brought in here for like emergency therapy by Eliza, but he's a hopeless case, right? Because he just doesn't fit into the managerial and HR culture of like, you know, as a coder, like a high performance coder, you are coddled and treated like this kind of precious asset, and just given like respect and room, and like there's very much more modern HR sort of philosophy of like, you know, we need to develop the capacities of our employees rather than like disciplining them like a military unit, right? And until the point when you're just dumped, right? like it's like, oh yeah, you're precious until you're worthless, right? Like that's kind of more the modern tech thing.
Well, that's it for this episode. Join us again next time when we conclude our discussion of Eliza. In the meantime, you can find us on Twitter at GIUnitPod. We're on Facebook, we're on all the podcasting apps, so like, rate, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. You can also support the show by going to patreon.com/generalintellectunit and throwing us a couple of bucks a month. At the $5 per month level, you'll get access to our community Discord. This show is part of the Emancipation Network, a Marxist podcast network and research collective. So go to emancipation.network and check out our sister shows from Alpha to Omega and Swampside Chats. There's some really great shows with some really great folks. You may have noticed that our recent release schedule has been a little bit slower than usual. Things have been a little bit crazy, but don't worry, we've got some big stuff planned for next year, and we are, as always, dedicated to producing an excellent show for you all. As always, thanks for listening and thanks for your support.